Hey guys, I'm Norb.
And I'm Mike.
And we're The Watchmen.
The men who watch.
Because if it's on a screen, we're watching and talking about it with you guys.
Today we have a very special show. We are going to talk about some of my favorite movies of all time, Tron and Tron Legacy.
So before we get into that, please, if you like what we're doing, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you won't miss a single episode in the future. All right, Tron and Tron Legacy. I guess we'll start with Tron first. Mike, why don't you get the ball rolling?
Well, first I gotta say, I don't care if this show's a little long because I love talking about both these movies. And this is also for my friend Keith, who is a good buddy of mine. And our friendship actually formed out of our love of Tron. So Keith, this one's for you. So to start with Tron I actually did not see in the theater, and it's probably one of the greatest regrets of my life. Why didn't I see it in the theater? Because when it came out, I thought it was going to be a Star Wars ripoff. It felt like a Star Wars ripoff, and I didn't know much more about it. You know, there was no internet for me to do research, and I just skipped. And it wasn't until they started showing movies after lunch when I was in middle school in the library. So we'd have lunch, and then in the library they'd start showing VHS movies on the TV. And my friends were like, "They're gonna show Tron." And I said, "Yeah, I never saw it." They said, "You never saw Tron? Oh my God!" And so I sat in the front row, and the minute the movie started, I thought, "Why did I not see this in the theater? This is so good."
So before you jump in, I guess I want to talk about that. So I did get to see this movie in the theater. I remember I saw it with my sister and some relatives. We were on our way down to California, and in California we watched this movie. And I'm so glad I did. Again, we know the theatrical experience, and this was one of those ones where it was great to be able to have seen it, the experience, the music, the sights on the big screen. And just a side note, there are two shows that I can think of that it's unfortunate Mike didn't see in the theater. First one was Tron. Second one is E.T. I don't know how those two things happened for a guy who's such a cinema lover, but it didn't happen. It's too bad. But here we are. You did finally see it. Continue on with your VHS experience of seeing Tron.
Well, all I can say to add to your comment is I could only go to the theater if my parents took me. It wasn't close enough to where I could hop on my bike like an E.T. and float my way over. So my parents had no interest in E.T., and therefore I wasn't taken to see E.T. I didn't know enough about E.T. outside to bug my parents to go either. And again, it was hard to get information on movies back in the 80s. There was no internet, no YouTube, no ability to even know if they were any good. The only way you knew what movies were playing in the theaters if you looked in the paper and just saw the movie times, and you'd see a poster, and that's about all you could know.
Yeah, and trailers. Sometimes had trailers on radio or TV, or your friends would tell you about it. That was pretty much how we found out about movies.
There was a really good radio trailer for Tron. I remember I used to listen to it, and it had this voice. He says, "They have traveled beyond the mind's reach." And then they had this sounds, and then samples from the movie, and then Tron. And they had like the commercial was testimonials from real people, like they'd been interviewed on the street. And I remember this one guy says, "It's like Star Wars inside a computer." And I remember, of course, I heard that, and that just furthered my, I'm not going to go see it. It's a Star Wars ripoff. So, like what you said. So in the library, that's where I got to see it for the first time, and I was hooked. After that, I would rent it on VHS whenever I could, and I watched it over and over. And I would get to the point where I would just watch the light cycle scene over and over and over and over. And then I'd watch it more after that, too.
Mm-hmm. Well, same thing for me. I saw it in the theater, but then we were early adopters of VHS and Betamax, actually. So usually what we would do is we would rent movies on Beta, and then I could record them to VHS, because there were some anti-copying mechanisms where you can go VHS to VHS, but Beta to VHS, it was okay. Anyway, so I had a VHS illegal copy at home, and like you, I not only watched it till I think I was wearing the oxides off the tape, but I put it on audio on tape so I could listen to it whenever I could. And I had that movie down. I memorized that movie because I watched it and listened to it so many times. That's how much I loved the whole Tron universe. So I'm like you, pulled in, and it had me from hello. So I love this, everything about this movie. Really, I think it's because of, again, like watching Star Wars at the age we did. When you watch Tron at the age we were at, that was when video games were at the peak of discovery. We spent a lot of time in the arcade, and this was the ultimate movie about taking the arcade world and putting a person inside it. And that was just, at that time, it meant so much to watch a movie that dealt with that idea. And it was a wonderful time and experience to see that at the time of our lives.
You know, and as we got older, they started releasing the movie with documentaries about how it was made. And so we slowly started learning technologically what they had to do to make that movie. And that in itself was just something else. I learned that when they shot all the characters in black and white, and all the color was added in a post-processing process where they used a bunch of animators overseas just to painstakingly rotoscope paint in colors and little light shafts. I mean, just intense, hard sweat labor work. And I also learned they shot using VistaVision cameras, which at that time VistaVision would shoot in the highest quality film negative you can do. And they needed to do it because they had to go through so many generations. It was the only way the resolution would even hold up. Mm-hmm. And I remember a story just about the cameraman. The VistaVisions had such a tight focus. One time he asked the director, he said, "Do you want me to focus on the front or the back of the eyeball?"
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's a tight depth of field.
Yeah. And I think that everything about that movie, you know, the music, and then of course it spawned video games, which I owned several Intellivision games of, you know, Tron Deadly Discs, Tron Solar Sailor, and then of course they had the arcade game, which you and I both played the heck out of, but eventually liked it so much that when we had our business office together, we bought a Tron machine and had it set up in our studio. And so that's how much we liked this movie, you know, that even to own that game. So it was a huge influence on us. And also, I think at that time, Jeff Bridges, I don't know if I'd seen him in anything else until that point. He was new to me in terms of the film world, and I thought he was great in it. He was just such a funny guy, physical comedy, the way he moved and walked, and he just was he was a great actor to play that part.
David Warner as Ed Dillinger.
Mr. Dillinger.
And it's just thanks for coming back early.
That was his voice.
He was also
too.
The voice of Master
so
Control.
He was talking to himself essentially. But yeah, hello, Mr. Dillinger. Thanks for coming back early. I mean, you recited those scenes so many times.
So Norb, you got to tell your story about how a lot of times back then you'd watch movies and thought they said one thing and they said something else.
Yes. So at one point, Mr. Dillinger, he's the evil head of NCOM. He's talking to his Master Control computer, which is like a big glass table with a talking computer and a touch screen, and they're having a conversation, and he asks him, you know, he needs to break into another computer system. And he says something like, "I'm getting bored with these programs. I want a bigger challenge." And he says, trying to remember the exact line here. He goes,
it says, "What branch?"
Yeah, what branch of the service? And I thought he said Strategic Admiron, but it's actually Strategic Air Command. But my whole life I thought it was Strategic Admiron. And then Dillinger responds, "Nice." But have you ever had that happen? You know, you listen to a song and you thought it was one thing your whole life, and you find out later, oh my gosh, is that what he said? I feel like such an idiot now.
Yeah, it happens all the time when you listen to songs. You hear a certain, and you just get used to, oh, they're saying that, and you find out, what, they were saying that? I always like that. Strategic Admiron.
Strategic Admiron. Makes no sense, but that's what my ear heard on that VHS tape. One of many scenes that I'd committed to memory.
I have lost track of how many times I've watched Tron in my lifetime. I would say over 100, and then some. It's just one of those movies that I don't get tired watching it, and I've shown it to my kids more than once. So.
I think these are one of those movies when people talk about it, I don't think as many people like you and I hold it in quite a high regard. You know, movies from that time period, the Raiders of the Lost Arks and Star Wars, is, you know, they're all kind of held up with a cultural understanding that this was a movie at the time, but there's a lot of people who thought Tron was stupid. Tron was cheesy, and just, because I think maybe it was a little bit too computer nerdy for some people. And, it wasn't like, especially if you look at it now, it's definitely dated. You can see the crudeness of all the effects. But again, you have to watch it and appreciate it for the time it came out and what it meant. That's, I think, again, why it resonates so strongly with that age and that time of our life, because of the arcade, the technology, computers being in their kind of infancy as far as people using them, and just that whole visual spectacle, the light cycles, the recognizers, and everything, the discs. Such a cool world that I just so wanted to be a part of. But it's awesome.
Yeah. And then that world evolved into a sequel, which took a long time to finally get off the ground and made, and that was Tron Legacy, which at this point is I think about 5 years old or so. But I'm going to start off our discussion on Tron Legacy with a story. And the story is Norb, me, and about 4 of our other friends, we had a big party at my house. And we agreed we were going to go see Tron Legacy opening night, midnight in 3D. And so our plan was they were going to come over to my place around 7 or 8 p.m. and we'd watch the first Tron, just so everybody kind of just refresh. Yep. And then we were going to go to the midnight showing at the Crossroads Cinema in Bellevue. And so they all came over. We had a great time. We watched Tron. And then about 10:30 or so, we headed out to the theater. And so we're in watching Legacy, and it gets to the light cycle scene with Legacy. Now, I'm going to basically reenact a moment. So I'm going to put on these sunglasses to simulate 3D glasses. And so I'm Norb, okay? I'm Norb. So I'm sitting next to Norb, and this is Norb. And I turned to Norb during the light cycle scene, and I was about ready to say, "Isn't this awesome?" And this is Norb. Now, with the 3D glasses, you can kind of hide behind them, but basically it was like this.
Shades on. I had fallen asleep. The sleep bug had hit me again. I don't know if it was the midnight show, if I didn't get much sleep the night before, but yes, I had fallen asleep in the middle of this long-awaited sequel, which I was looking so much forward to. Fallen asleep.
And thus began your legacy of Tron Legacy.
And it doesn't even just stop there. I don't know if you're done with the story. That's pretty funny introduction. We tried to do it again. We have these annual guide trips where our roommates go on a reunion trip every year, and we go to some place and hang out for the weekend, play video games, and just hang out. And we tried to watch Tron Legacy again. And once again, I fell asleep a second time. So it wasn't until just a couple days ago when I finally, in preparation for the show, sat down and watched the movie so I could at least talk about it, because I needed to be conscious through the whole thing.
So I've seen Tron Legacy. I've seen Tron Legacy at least 20, 30 times. I love the film. I can talk about it for a long time. I am anxious for your review now that you have finally watched it from start to finish. So, what did you think?
So, it brought me back, because I wasn't asleep the whole time. Obviously, I was in and out of consciousness, but there were some things I remember. And I remember the first thing, and I'll start with my positives and work my way to the negatives, as we go back and forth. But my first thing that I remember, even at the time, the big hype was they made Jeff Bridges look like young Jeff Bridges. And I remember at the time when I watched it in the theater, I thought, that's pretty good, they'd never done this before. And it's like, he does kind of look like young Jeff Bridges. And it wasn't until when I watched it this last time, I don't know if it was because of the screen I was on, or maybe because, again, I was more awake this time, but it looked a lot more fakier now than it did at the time. It had that Polar Express look to the eyes. That's the main thing, is the eyes had that kind of glazed over sort of, my name's Clue. So that's kind of what sort of stood out at the time of that was one of the big hypes around the movie. But still, pretty cool technology. And I'll just add, before we continue to keep the back and forth going, visually, of course, the visual effects were on another level. It's like taking your Tron world and amping it up to modern day levels of effects. So it's cool to see Tron 3D cycles that are, with what look like glass, and they're moving on multiple levels, and the sound, of course, is awesome, and just everything about the world from the visual effects standpoint was pretty cool. So I guess I'll stop at this point and toss it back to you towards before I get back to the flip side of my review of the show. But those things were pretty cool to see.
Well, along the lines of the Jeff Bridges 3D character, I have to agree. There's a term in the visual effects industry, it's called the uncanny valley. And it has a term for you do everything right, but yet there's something that makes it wrong and you don't know how to fix it. So the Jeff Bridges 3D character, that was motion captured by a real actor with dots in their face. And so everything was transported to the 3D character correctly. But then when you look at it on screen, there's just something wrong. And as much as I've watched it, I think it's something in his lips. I keep looking at the way his lips kind of look, and there's a weird pursing.
Yeah, the mouth is a little weird, but the eyes are what did it for me, because everything's about your soul, or the eyes are your windows to your soul, and this windows did not look good. but
I've accepted that as they did what they could. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with that, and I let that go. To me, it's just part of the story, and it's part of the way the movie was made. It does not at all deter from the fact that I love the film. So, what else do you have to say?
There were a couple of nice nods back to the old Tron, particularly early on. That is a big door. He kind of his son Sam says that in response to the same door that is in the famous line in the first movie. I guess a little bit about the story. We talk about going back to the computer world in the first Tron, and in this one, his son is now kind of, Jeff Bridges has disappeared in the computer, and now his son Sam, who's kind of been, is taking over, supposed to be in charge of the company now. He kind of goes in, gets a secret page, from inside his dad's office.
Still rocking the pager.
Rocking the pager, and he gets zapped into the world just like he did in the first one, and then he enters the computer world and discovers things, and eventually reunites with his father. I guess to get to my actual review part of it, sadly, now that I've seen it consciously from start to finish, I was disappointed in the film. To put it in the most simple description, I would say it's really slick, but no heart. That was my reaction to it. And again, everything from a technical level and the visuals was a spectacle. But as we know from so many movies now that have great special effects and everything like that, unless you have the characters and the story that pull you in, that stuff is just window dressing. So it's got to have that stuff that gets to your soul, gets to your heart, pulls you into the story and makes you, immersed in it and stop thinking about that you're watching a movie. You just feel like you're part in the world. And I was trying to get into the character, and I think part of it was, I don't even know the name of the actor who plays Sam, his son, but he
Garrett
just
Hedlund.
He just didn't do it for me. I felt like as I was watching him, he just wasn't interesting. He was kind of, he wasn't particularly funny. He wasn't particularly, he was just sort of lukewarm. And because of that, I never felt a connection with him. Unlike Jeff Bridges, who I felt an immediate connection because he had this kind of funny wit about him. But unfortunately, I think that's the main thing where things fell flat. It was that if I don't feel that bond with the protagonist and care about him, then it's hard for me to care about much else in the story. And that's where probably things start to unravel for me. Care to disagree? I'm sure you do, because you love this film.
Yeah, and I cared about him just fine. I didn't have any problems with him at all. I felt like the movie had plenty of heart. It's got a great father-son story about what it means to grow older and miss out on things in life. And I'm sorry, man.
I'm agree. I'm sorry too. I think the part where I was supposed to feel a bond between, the real bond between the father, Kevin Flynn, and his son Sam, was when they were sitting kind of at the dinner table and they're talking about, where has he been all this time and what does this all mean? And instead of being pulled in, I got that Matrix sequel feel where there was just a lot of talking, but not being pulled into their dialogue in a way that I was bonding with the characters. And I'm disappointed that I didn't, because I just felt like I just wanted to, looking at my watch, wondering when are we going to get to the next action sequence? Because it just didn't feel as much of a connection as I felt I was supposed to. So I know that was an important part of the show, and it just didn't quite connect with me. So sadly, I just didn't feel the level, which I'm sure you probably did on that scene, right? I'm sure that was a very important scene.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, he's asking me, he says, do you have a wife, girlfriend? He says, dog, Marvin, and then Jeff Bridges says, oh, okay, dogs are cool, And also, they made sure that Jeff Bridges' character continued to talk in 80s type slang because he'd never left the 80s. So it's a subtle thing when he says, I have a dog, and he says, oh, dogs are cool. That's an 80s term, saying cool. And later in the movie, he says, radical, man. There's moments of that. And it makes sense because he never left the 80s. So he would talk in those slang terms. But he says dogs are cool, and there's a little bit more. But he really says, I'm sure you're just wondering one thing. And he says, yeah, why I never came home. And then he tells him the whole story about Clue and what happened. And I thought that was a very moving scene where it really does. Finally, Sam understands why his dad never came home, which has haunted him his entire life. And that's the moment that he can start to heal and basically accept that it wasn't his father's fault and his father never really did leave him. There's a lot of deep stuff there. I guess that just blew right over you.
No, it just didn't hit me. It didn't hit me in the soul, so I didn't connect. And instead, I just felt like wanting to move things along. I didn't have that connection. The father-son thing just didn't quite hit with me. So, I don't know. I'll have to
again, I'm sorry.
I am sorry too, because it's not like I wanted to hate the movie or anything. I actually wanted the best for this film. I just never quite connected. But
another great thing about this movie, I'll talk a little bit about, is the music. And what was really great about Tron Legacy is Daft Punk, who is a well-known techno group. They were commissioned to do the soundtrack. But what is really great about the soundtrack, and I had read this, is that Daft Punk understood that, look, we know a movie's got to have an orchestral score. It can't just be techno. And so what is so great about the music is that it's techno, but it's orchestrated techno, and sometimes it takes turns. You've got a techno beat, but then an orchestral side of the theme eases in and out, and to me that makes the soundtrack really memorable because of that neat combination that they did.
It's funny, I was going to bring up music, and it was actually one of the reasons why I further didn't like the movie. I did not like the score. I did not like the score.
What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you?
I'm telling you, so and I know what you're describing. It was a techno beat, and the music was orchestral playing along to it. But for me, instead of enhancing the scenes, I felt they just sort of trudged along with this sort of very repetitive beat that didn't have enough ups and downs to it. I think I was trying to think, well, maybe they're doing this because it's supposed to simulate being in a computer and the cyclical nature of binary code and stuff. That's why it's like more of a... But for me, it's just like the music was like, I'm getting numbed here because it's not moving me. The score for Tron had all kinds of da 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 da, and was a score in the more traditional sense with different variations. But this to me was constantly like, hit the drum beat now, and then we'll put some strings over it, but it just kept repeating, and it didn't heighten the moments for me. It felt like it dumbed them down. So I actually did not like the score as it worked with the show. Now, maybe if I listened to it by itself, I might just kind of enjoy a piece of music that they had for it by itself, but as it worked with the picture, it didn't enhance the film for me. And
look, you're the guy that always gets frustrated when there's not a theme in a movie. And this has a wonderful theme. Da 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 da. And that's reoccurring throughout the whole show. And sometimes it's done techno, sometimes it's done orchestral. But that is a theme wound through the whole movie, which is something that you are frustrated when you don't feel like there's a theme that you can take with you.
I should add to this.
And everything you just said, you said there was no theme. I mean, you basically never talked about a theme. You brought up a theme from the original Tron, but you never talked about a theme in Legacy, and I just sang it to you. And it was a beautiful job singing, I might add.
Yes.
I'm a great singer, you know.
It sounded just like the movie.
I did the best I could.
I should add at this point, so I actually am a composer. I've written many scores for our videos. I scored our film, Frayed, that we will someday talk about, the horror film that we released on Lionsgate in 2009. And I've done music for commercials. So I look at music in a lot of times a very different way because I'm often deconstructing it in my head and listening to what the composer is trying to do at this point. I'm not denying that there was a melodic theme to it, but again, that by itself doesn't necessarily save a score in my mind, because of the score is supposed to create a feeling and enhance what you're seeing on the picture, so that it is the two things coming together where the music moves and lifts up in what you're seeing in the imagery. And again, for me, it was just, I know what Daft Punk is, and I like a lot of their stuff. I like a lot of their techno things and all that. But for me, it just, again, felt like it felt just very repetitive and monotonous in terms of tempo. And it wasn't because there was several. It wasn't just one. It was like several that had that same approach. And I guess I kind of got used to that pattern. I was like, okay, it's just a background track.
So after this movie came out, I bought the soundtrack. And in my life, this soundtrack represents a very important moment where it was the first time I taught my oldest son what it means to listen to a soundtrack in the car and visualize the movie by listening to the music. The scene where Sam jumps off the tower of Encom Tower, I used to play that song for Brett when he was sitting in his car seat, and I'd say, okay, now you see how it's building? He's kind of going, dun, 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 dun. And I say, okay, he's basically on the tower, he's thinking about jumping. I said, and then he jumps, and then the music goes, dun, it gets really, really fast-paced with the orchestral strings, and I remember the grin on his face as I'm describing the music and what's happening. How can you not say there were moments in this movie that were like that?
I'd have to rewatch that one to see that particular scene, because I don't remember the music on that particular scene. I think I became aware of it, and it was once I was aware that in a point in my mind during one of I want to say it's like 3/4 of the way through the movie, when I finally thought, this music is kind of hitting me a certain way, that I decided at that point I didn't like how it was working. And it was during I think it was a chase scene, I think when they're in the plane and the other plane's chasing them, and it had the music was that same feel, and that was what was going on. And at that point, I wasn't really thinking about the music up to that point. So maybe it wasn't bad, it wasn't a certain way, but at that point I became aware. And once I became aware, I didn't like it anymore. So maybe I'm being unfairly kind of going, well, the music I didn't like as a whole, because I'm taking that one moment of realization and applying it to everything. And maybe that's not fair, because there might be some moments that I'm overlooking. But during a part where I felt like I wanted the music to enhance this for me, it didn't. And when I was aware that it wasn't, I got pulled out. I was talking to myself thinking, I don't like the music here. It's not working. The scenes could be using more here. And because of all that stuff going on in my head, I didn't like the scene. It took me out of the movie. I wasn't in it anymore. And that's kind of where it hit me. I'm sorry, man. I didn't even know about all this stuff you're telling me, and it's too bad that it's such a disappointment that we're on such opposite ends, where normally you and I are like so lock in step with movies that we like, but we're clearly on the opposite ends, about as opposite I think we've ever been on a film.
Well, it's okay to be wrong sometimes, and this is one time where you are, so it's okay. It happens to the best of us. Mm-hmm. So
okay.
Well, is there anything else you would like to say about Tron or Tron Legacy?
Well, and I think the main thing is I was wishing for more funnier moments, this little kind of comedic kind of moments. And there was one that I liked. There's one where Jeff Bridges kind of conks the security guard in the head. And I liked that part. Oh, that was cool. That was fun. I kind of giggled on that part. But a lot of the rest of the time, I was just watching things and not feeling that either passionately excited, passionately scared, passionately laughing. It was just sort of, I felt like the beat of the music. And I just sort of was coasting along. And I wish they had more moments.
Actually, Castor was a really funny character.
Is that the guy in the bar?
Castor.
I don't know. I'm sorry, man. I did not like that guy. I didn't like him. He was kind of just obnoxious to me. He was trying to be funny, but he did not make me laugh. He reminded me of that guy from the Matrix sequels, more Merovingian or whatever. He's like big, over-the-top personality and supposed to, I think, be kind of quirky and funny, but he just wasn't funny. He was just this character. He's up there strumming his air guitar, and I was just like, I guess I don't get this guy. So I didn't get him. He didn't connect with me in a way that I found him funny. So
he's eccentric. He's an eccentric dude.
Right, and I got that, but it just
I like the part where he's looking through the disc and he holds up, Kevin's disc right before he has to give it away to Clue, and he looks right, he says, "Don't you think?" And he kind of smiles, grins through it. It was a funny little moment.
Didn't make me laugh though. So
a side bit in the bar scene when Sam first enters the bar, there's a bartender that you just see him in the background. It's a slightly older guy with some dark brown hair. That's actually Steven Lisberger, the director of the original Tron movie. So he has a cameo and plays the bartender in that scene.
Okay, that's cool. But that's really it. I don't want to beat on this too hard. I think I've said most of the things that I wanted to say. Like I said, there's certain aspects, visual effects wise, and all that was incredible. I still think that's really cool to see the Tron world enhanced like that. For me, it was a swing and a miss in terms of the character connection, and the stuff that normally makes you more invested in the movie just unfortunately didn't pull me in. So because of that, I'm out.
Little Shark Tank there.
Little Shark Tank. But agree to disagree.
I'm glad I don't feel that way. I love this movie. I even watched it last weekend myself because my youngest son is into techno, and we were talking about Daft Punk, and my wife actually said, "We should watch Tron Legacy again." I said, "Well, that's great timing. Let's go ahead and watch it." So we did. All right. Well, that is the end of our Tron and Tron Legacy discussion. So for some surprises, I have a few. Since it's Tron.
Okay.
And it's such a big deal to me. So I've just got a bunch of things to share. And I'm going to start with, this was actually my very first eBay purchase back in the early 2000s when I finally got on board with eBay. So one of the first things I did is I looked for Tron stuff. And what I purchased was this Tron 36 count pack of full color trading cards, 25 cents each, from the 80s. And with that, I actually ended up with a couple extras. So that's what it looks like there.
Did it have the gum inside too?
It says 8 cards plus 1 sticker.
Oh, no gum.
But what I thought I would do just for fun is I'm going to open this on the air with you.
Whoa.
All right? So we're just going to literally open this old package and see what we got. And oh, look at that sticker. How cool is that? That is the I.O. Tower, literally from the arcade game. And then another picture of Tron, the Dillinger's, they call it the carrier ship, basically the bad guy's main ship in the movie. And and famous recognizer, look at that. And a light cycle. This is cool stuff. This is stuff that is just neat to look at. It's just always neat when you can have stills from the movie that you can just kind of stare at an image for a while and study it. There's Jeff Bridges. And that's one of the tanks from Tron that was chasing the light cycles. Really cool tank programs. Oh, and that's neat. Look at that. Actually got one of the poster images from the game. That's Bruce Boxleitner as Tron. Jeff Bridges' character was actually Flynn. And that's a tank operator. I remember I can look at that right away, and he says, 2 units derezzed. And then Tron yells, "No!" And there's one last shot of the light cycles. Wow, I had no idea what was in this pack, and this was a great collection of photos.
Oh, look at that. Revealing the treasure in front of a YouTube audience. I didn't even know they had cards. That's pretty cool. I knew they had I had the Star Wars cards and Close Encounters cards. I didn't know they had Tron cards. That's pretty cool.
So when Tron Legacy came out, at Disneyland, they had a huge exhibit. They rebuilt Flynn's arcade and filled it full of arcade games. I didn't actually get to go, but what I heard is they were giving out souvenirs. And so they actually had tokens that said Flynn's Arcade.
Oh, that's cool.
See that right there. And then what was even cooler is on the back, they actually had the games that Kevin Flynn talked about in the original Tron of the other games he invented. Remember he said Space Paranoids, Vice Squad. So they literally had a token, and someone came up with art of the fight, what the Vice Squad title could look like. Just all it was is just a mention in the movie, and they took that
to another level. That's awesome.
Took it to another level. There's one more, is Arc Wars, just another list of games he mentioned he made. So those tokens are pretty neat. The last things to share real quick are when Tron Legacy came out, Keith and I, this was a fun memory, is we went bananas trying to collect all the Tron Legacy toys that they were selling at Target and other toy stores. And they had all these different types of things. This is an example of one thing. This was Kevin Flynn's light cycle. They had all kinds. They had figures, toys, ships. And so Keith and I were actually going back and forth and letting each other know what we were finding, because wherever you went, there would always be something out. But the hardest thing to find, there always is one thing. It's like of a whole collection, there's just one toy, one part of the line that no one can seem to find. And that was this. This was Kevin Flynn's identity disc. They had 3 different identity discs. They had Sam's, Rinsler's, and Kevin's. And for some reason, the white one you couldn't find. So I have Keith to thank for this. He found it for me and gave it to me the next time we got together. And so this is the rarest of all the Tron toys when Legacy came out.
Wow.
And with that, that was a lot of stuff to share. So I am done. I'm sure you really enjoyed that.
Oh, yeah, I'm really done. That's pretty cool. That is still pretty cool. All right, well, we agree to disagree on our review of Tron Legacy, but we both agree that we love the original Tron equally. So that wraps up our review of Tron and Tron Legacy. Thanks for watching The Watchmen. I'm Norb.
And I'm Mike.
And again, we are The Watchmen.
The Men Who Watch. See you next time.
Thanks for watching The Watchmen.
Please click on here to watch other episodes, and be sure to hit that like button too.
And please subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll always be alerted to any future episodes.
It really helps us out, and we appreciate it.
We'll see you next time. And remember, we'll be watching.